Well, I think it's not only about a video game, but it's actually about a culture that actually, in some ways, embraces violence against women. You know, every 6 days in Canada, a woman is murdered by her spouse or partner, and these are serious concerns. And you know, as sex workers, we are also subject to greater amounts of violence, and we can see this with the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across the country. Of course, not all of them are involved in the sex trade, but some are. We see this with what happened with Robert Pickton in Vancouver, and we hear about, you know, incidences of violence at Maggie's quite often, especially against street-based sex workers who are among the most marginalized. And if you look at the legislation that just recently passed, C-36, with this legislation, although it is erroneously called, a protection of community and families or something like that, so it has this aspect that it's supposed to be protecting sex workers, but in actual fact is it will leave sex workers more vulnerable to violence and abuse and exploitation because of the way that the legislation is set up, because it continues to criminalize the sex industry. And by criminalizing it, you leave people more open to these kinds of violence and exploitation. And so a video game like this, you see how, you know, as a culture, we continue to embrace and value violence against women, and especially violence against sex workers. And that's a real concern.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think the question is not have we gone too far, but you can't go any further, I suppose, after viewing this. I mean,
Right.
What's next in gaming, right?
Yes, that's true. And the other question too is, you know, who is playing these games as well, and as a culture, what are we promoting, right?
Exactly.
And it's not simply about what's happening in a video game. And no, I don't think things are caused by it, but if you look at lots of popular culture, you know, whether it's CSI, you know, a lot of things, a lot of popular culture, it just ends with a sex worker being murdered. You know, there's a whole genre of jokes about murdering sex workers, and this is part of our culture, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And just on a personal note, are you disturbed? Are you disgusted? What do you feel watching this? Like your immediate response, you know, when watching it, what comes to mind?
When you first showed it to me, it reminded me of what our culture says about violence against women, about violence against sex workers, and how this kind of violence is tolerated and actually in some ways promoted in popular culture, as well as through legislation that aims to supposedly protect sex workers. But one of the senators actually stated during the C-36 hearings that they aren't there to make life safer for sex workers. It's a literal quote from Senator Plett. We aren't here to make life safer for sex workers. We want to eradicate prostitution. So it makes it very clear that this government does not care about the safety and security of sex workers. And so when you have a government that does not value the lives and contributions of sex workers, you can see how a video game like this is also very easily tolerated.